Hello, my fabulous film friends. So it is that time of week again where we highlight another classic movie from years past. My name is Stasia, lifelong film fan, and I love to talk about movies. This week's movie classic is going to be the 1965 historical epic love story, Doctor Zhivago. This was directed by David Lean, who to this point was known for his other epic historical films, Lawrence of Arabia and Bridge on the River Kwai. The popular historic Russian novel published in the 1950s is probably a good fit for David Lean to bring to the big screen. The book was written by Russian novelist Boris Pasternak, who actually had to smuggle the novel out of Russia to get it published. During that time, during the mid to late 50s in Russia, if you were an artist of such or a writer, you had to get your work approved by the Russian government for publishing, and they had refused Doctor Zhivago to be published. Boris worked on smuggling it out of Russia, and it was eventually published in 1957 in Italy. The story itself takes place between the Russian Revolution of 1905 and the beginning of World War II. And in it, Pasternak was critical of the October Revolution in Russia, and because of that stance, it was refused publication in the USSR. And that is the reason why it was published in Italy. Pasternak was also, the following year, awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, which he had to refuse because of the Russian government. But the fact that that happened enraged the Russian government. So this movie stars Omar Sharif as Yuri Zhivago, the doctor in question, and he had been in, of course, Lawrence of Arabia before and worked with David Lean. And Julie Christie in her breakout role, it wasn't her first role, but she didn't have that much film experience at the time, but she got the lead role as Lara in Doctor Zhivago. The film also stars Geraldine Chaplin as Dr. Zhivago's long-suffering wife, Alec Guinness as Zhivago's brother, and it also stars Rod Steiger. During the Russian Revolution, Dr. Zhivago is a young doctor who has been raised by his aunt and uncle following his own father's suicide. Yuri falls in love with the young, attractive, virginal Lara, played by Julie Christie. She has been having an affair with her mother's lover, Victor, who is played by Rod Steiger. Yuri, or Dr. Zhivago, ends up marrying his cousin, Tanya, who is played by Geraldine Chaplin. Yes, Charlie Chaplin's daughter. And then years later, he meets Lara again and sparks fly. And the center of the story and the enduring part of Dr. Zhivago is this never-ending love story between Yuri and Lara, and the ever-suffering of Dr. Zhivago's wife. They both see one another as their one true love. Lara ends up marrying Pasha, and of course, Dr. Zhivago, or Yuri, is married to Tanya, but they always have that passionate love with their true love that never dies every time they see each other. The story is narrated by Dr. Zhivago, or Yuri Zhivago's brother, who is played by Alec Guinness, and we will all recognize the voice of Alec Guinness as always and forever, even though this movie came out first, as Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Old Ben. So although this movie is, the story though, is set in Russia, they could not do any filming in Russia. Most of this movie is filmed on sets in Spain. So they actually, David Lean, described as quite a tyrant of directing, pushed the people, the craftsmen, the actors, everybody who made this movie, from the sets to the lighting, everything, to build this town, and he pushed them into perfection. And although people had stories of how abusive he may be on set, they never argued with what he got out of what he was demanding. They all agreed that they made a brilliant movie and couldn't fault him for being such a tyrant on set and getting this done. They see it as the price of making art. And of course, because they couldn't film in Russia, and the ban on Doctor Zhivago basically lasted for decades. This movie actually wasn't shown in Russia until 1994. So we had to get rid of the USSR into the new democratic Russia. And finally, Doctor Zhivago, a historical story through the Russian ages, was finally available to actual Russians. This film being filmed in Spain during 1964-65, it was under the regime of General Francisco Franco during that time. And the making of the movie and the extras in the movie was always under heavy surveillance because of the Marxist theme of the movie, and Franco's fascist government would observe the locals and everything and make lists of people to see if they had any revolutionary intentions. Now, this is a long movie, even by today's standard. It's long. It clocks in at 3 hours and 17 minutes. But the public back then was used to every once in a while there being epic films made, especially by David Lean. It was his specialty. But this is the old style movie where there's an overture at the beginning for people coming into the audience, taking their seats, not to interrupt the movie. There is an intermission in the middle also to give people a chance to get up, get refreshments, go to the bathroom. That is something you just don't see in movies today, even if they clock in at like 4 hours long. But this one, despite its length, was a huge hit at the time. It and The Sound of Music in 1965 were the top film, both basically competing against one another during the award season of 1966, since they both came out in 1965. It was a huge hit, and when you adjust for inflation, Doctor Zhivago is still one of the biggest movies of all time, with its gross, when adjusted for inflation, being in the top 10. So this movie started filming in December of 1964. It went on filming through October 1965, and it was actually released December 22nd, 1965. It had only 8 weeks of editing after filming stopped because the studio insisted on it being a December release, which probably is part of the reason why it clocks in at that 3 hours and 17 minute time frame. During the promotion of this film, they leaned heavily into the romance angle of this film between Yuri Zhivago and Lara, with Omar Sharif's dark, seductive look and Julie Christie's almost virginal purity as that blonde-haired, blue-eyed, although not American, very American-looking woman. And it made huge stars out of both of them, especially Julie Christie, who was largely unknown before this. She became a huge star around the world because of Doctor Zhivago. And with all of the award season loves and how we think of Doctor Zhivago today, you would think it was a critical darling at the time. And that was not the case. It received very mixed reviews. Some thinking the movie was an overblown hack job, to the photography not being that great. Although we look at it now and we see this wonderful, epic, sweeping photography with all of its colors and richness, and then in the parts of sadness in the movie where they strip it from all color and it's just a flat white and gray. So even though the movie was a big box office hit, David Lean actually was more concerned what the critics thought. And he was so upset and affected by the fact that critics were so mixed and really didn't like this movie that he vowed never to make another movie again. He didn't quite stick to that, but for the rest of his career, even though he had such big hits, he only made 2 more movies in his career. His next movie was not until 1970. It was the movie Ryan's Daughter, which was both a critical and box office bomb. So that was a big blow to David Lean when he decided to come back, and it was not well received either by the fans or the critics. And the other movie that he made after Doctor Zhivago and after Ryan's Daughter was even later. He made his last film 14 years after the bomb of Ryan's Daughter. So in 1984, he made the movie A Passage to India. David Lean went on to pass away in 1991 of throat cancer. But as often happens with movies, now Doctor Zhivago, by critics, has garnered a relook and a rewatch and a reevaluation of the movie, and it is now a critical darling and often cited as one of the masterpieces of the 20th century. The score of the movie and Laura's theme in the movie are considered some of the best scores in music of all times. It actually became a big hit after it was released in movie theaters, with it being played on the radio and people buying records of the actual soundtrack to the movie, which wasn't like today where you have songs in the movie where people would sing along. It was the actual score of the movie that became a big hit. And it is one of the most familiar scores in movie history. And speaking of box office success, this is the second most profitable movie in MGM history. The first most profitable movie in MGM history is, of course, Gone with the Wind. And this movie's score won the Best Original Score Oscar that year. And after the movie came out, especially in 1966, since it didn't come out until December of 1965, what was deemed the Zhivago look swept fashion houses, such as Yves Saint Laurent and Christian Dior. Fur trims, silk braids, and boots inspired by the looks in the movie became very in fashion at the time. It also brought back the popularity of beards and mustaches in men just before the time when the culture shifted to the counterculture in the 60s. The early 60s and the late 60s are very different from each other in that decade. And this movie was shot over the summer, mainly in Spain. So you see them wear all those furs and boots and all this luxurious, heavy fabrics. And it was so hot that summer that they had to put in ventilation in back of the costumes so the actors wouldn't just pass out from all these heavy fabrics and the extreme heat they were having in Spain that summer. Some casting trivia about the movie is David Lean originally wanted Peter O'Toole to play the title role. He turned it down. Omar Sharif originally wanted to play Pasha in the movie, who is Laura's husband. David Lean ended up casting him in the lead role. Omar Sharif was almost near like a full mental breakdown making this movie because of the pressures of taking on such a high-profile title role in a film which he had never been the star of the movie before. For the character of Laura, Carlo Ponti, who was the producer of the movie, originally wanted his wife, Sophia Loren, to play Laura, but David Lean said nobody would believe Sophia Loren in this role that was touted as this virginal, angelic role, even though she has an affair with a married man and she's married during the movie, but that's besides the point. Also, they looked at Jane Fonda in the role of Laura, but Then after a fabulous screen test, David Lean went on to cast the largely unknown Julie Christie in the movie. And the rest is history. Jane Fonda has gone on to say in interviews that out of all of the movies that she turned down, this is the one movie she regrets turning down. David Lean also originally wanted Audrey Hepburn to play Zhivago's wife, Tanya, but he became so impressed at Geraldine Chaplin's audition that he forwent the Audrey Hepburn casting and cast Geraldine Chaplin in the role. And he cast her on the spot after her audition. And David Lean, like I mentioned earlier, was such a control freak that he told each actor exactly how he wanted them to play the roles. He would do take after take until they got it exactly how he wanted. They had no input on how they wanted to play the role. The only person that this really didn't work on was Rod Steiger, who went on and would improvise stuff in scenes, and it would enrage David Lean. So all in all, at the time of release in 1965, Doctor Zhivago became one of the biggest hits in movie history. Although not a critical darling, went on to win some Academy Awards and be nominated for a lot. But like I said, it was up against The Sound of Music, which was the darling in both audiences and critics at the time. That went on to win Best Picture. Starting 20 years later, a relook by critics now considers this one of the best epic romantic historical films ever made. The score is probably the most popular thing that people are all over, even if they haven't seen the movie, are familiar with the score of the movie. And if you've never seen 1965's Doctor Zhivago and you are a true movie fan, it should be on your list to watch. Just keep in mind it is 3 hours and 17 minutes, but it does have an intermission in it for you to go get that popcorn. I mean, you're not watching it in the movie theater, so you can just pause it on your TV. And all in all, if you love movies, Doctor Zhivago should definitely be on your watch list. You will fall in love with Omar Sharif and Julie Christie. They are perfect in their part. You'll also fall in love with Geraldine Chaplin, who is just innocent and taken advantage of in this movie, with her part of Tanya, the long-suffering wife of Dr. Zhivago. Even though she's married to him, she knew he was always in love with Lara. This has been Stacia again with my movie recommendation of the week. And do me a favor, if you've watched this, please subscribe to the channel. Give me a little comment. I'm looking forward to reaching 100 subscribers and then onward and upward from there. But thank you all and have a fabulous day. I love you. Bye.